Everyone. I'm really thrilled to welcome Leslie Forde today. How to make space for learning and growth in the current climate. We're all pressed for time, and we just don't know how we're going to get through and continue to grow personally while meeting the demands of both our personal and professional lives. So I'm pleased to welcome Leslie, who will speak on this important topic at this moment.
Thank you. I am honored to be here. I mean, this is a topic that's very near and dear to my soul, and I think especially right now, as leaders, we are being challenged in ways that generations before us were not. So it puts an extreme premium on how we use our precious time and attention. I think resources like this one, and having had the opportunity to meet Dora and to see the community that you are all part of, and the intentional fostering of learning, has been really impressive. So I'm thrilled to join and take part in that. So I'm going to start sharing my slides. But note, this is going to be an interactive discussion, and very intentionally, because I think that's how I like to do it. And I think that's how we tend to get the most out of it. So feel free to let me know if you have questions, and I will stop and ask questions along the way. So I'm going to just share a little bit of background about my journey and kind of what led me to this work and led me to the research that's behind the stories and information that I'll share today. I'm Leslie Forde. I'm the founder of Mom's Hierarchy of Needs. And this kind of triangle that you see is the visual of the Mom's Hierarchy of Needs framework. I had a pretty unglamorous return to work after my second child was born. At the time, I had taken on a promotion while I was pregnant, and I was moving from managing one department to two departments. I was a little bit nervous because I knew that I would be taking on these new responsibilities to manage a different team, and I wouldn't really have a lot of time to get to know them before I went out on leave. But, I was assured everything's going to be fine. Don't worry, don't worry. We've got your back. It's going to be great. And, in the 12 weeks that I was away, it was as if the whole world had changed at my then employer. And a couple of weeks before returning, the general manager of our division, who was my boss, he called me and said, your, most senior person, your senior director, your rock star. Well, we had to move her to a different department, and we can't backfill her because we're trying to, demonstrate profitability and cut costs. And, all those open recs that you had for your new positions, well, we had to close them because we're trying to demonstrate profitability. And at the time, I was being asked, coming back, in effect, to develop a strategy and a plan for what felt like a new job. The organization's goals had changed, the climate had changed, the financial climate and the economy had changed. And I was being asked to bring my most, strategic, clear thinking self to the work when I was sleeping in 90-minute increments with a newborn and a toddler. And it was the first time in my life where I remember people who did not know me asking if I was okay. And I would find myself just consumed during the days with meetings, back-to-back meetings. And so a lot of my really important deep work and strategic work was inevitably pushed to late at night and the weekends. And I'd be typing away, trying to shield the glow of my computer from my co-sleeping baby, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. And like many of us, when faced with challenges, I felt at the time, like, well, I'm have all these new issues in my professional life, but the answer must be to just work harder. And of course, it was unsustainable. And a job that I once absolutely loved became unmanageable and untenable. I burned out in kind of a spectacular way. And it was about 2 years later, a founder who happened to, kind of live locally. He was introduced to me because I was known as a market researcher and somebody who kind of focused on research and how it related to strategy. And at that point, I had downshifted that job where I burned out and I absolutely loved it. I went from managing these two departments to managing one direct report. I took a 40% pay cut, and it still took over 2 years to recover from burning out. So it was a conversation after that. And he said, I'm interested in getting, and having an advisor join my advisory board. And he had a wearable device for stress. And he wanted to know how to think about the market. And I said, well, what about moms? And he said, why are moms so stressed? And I said, well, there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs and there's mom's hierarchy of needs. And as soon as I drew it on a little piece of paper, like I felt something. Um, I became just obsessed with the problem of why was it so hard to care for my mental, physical, and emotional health after having kids and to continue to grow in my career. So, long story and fast forward to what I learned after running a series of research studies where I've now heard from thousands of parents, um, overwhelmingly mothers in my public studies, but I also run versions of this inside of employers. And so, whether it's a mom, a dad, an elder caregiver, somebody who is earlier in their career, or somebody who might just be caring for themselves, there was a lot of resonance to this dilemma that we face. A lot of the things that we really, really prioritize, and in the case of parents, it's often our children's well-being and their milestones. It is an important dimension of caregiving that their needs kind of become kind of they float to the top of the list. We also have all of the responsibilities in our households, in our homes. Then, if you kind of get up to the way up into the tippy top of the triangle, our professional roles and all the responsibilities we hold there, healthy adult relationships. If you are partnered, that includes your partner, sleep, movement, stress management, fun, learning, growth, all of those things way up at the tippy top. We start to gradually deprioritize the busier life gets. You think, oh, well, when I have time, then I will call that friend, take that walk, pursue that PhD, see that movie, whatever it is, it feels like it can be relegated to someday or later when there's more time. But what I learned through the series of research studies and now hearing from thousands of people, again, overwhelmingly parents and caregivers in my public studies, but a much more balanced view in my employer studies, is that these things that we prioritize the most that are core to our identities, like caring for our children, like caring for our families, like caring for our homes, or managing our household and managing our career, they're mostly things that are never done anymore. Right? There's no done at the end of the day. Your children's milestones, if you are an elder caregiver caring for an adult, those responsibilities don't end. Household responsibilities, cleaning doesn't end. And in most careers, most of us are being called upon to bring our best and show up as our strongest selves at all times. And most modern careers, especially with the, accessibility we have now through technology, they don't end either. So we kind of spin in this circle of service and wanting to get everything done in the bottom two thirds, but way up at the tippy top, all of those things that are really critical for our mental, physical, and emotional health, it doesn't feel like there's time for them anymore. Later, also kind of after that conversation, I did take that advisory role. I now have worked for two mental health care companies in addition to working in early childhood education and from the media side, child care, elder care, technology, and a whole range of different industries. But I've had access to great clinicians and researchers and neuroscientists. And through those interviews in my professional life, in addition to what I've learned with my studies, is that all of the things at the top are really what we need to reduce cortisol in our bodies. So helping us manage the marathon of life and helping us reduce the stress that often can lead to inflammation and challenges with our health, in addition to just not feeling well. So we put those things off. Those things are really critical to kind of manage our emotional state, manage our physical state, and they become essential. And when I learned that, not only are these things really critical for our health and well-being, they're also really critical in many cases to provide the fuel that we need in our careers. I started to become a bit ruthless about making the time for them and carved more space every day for those activities at the top. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do, I think let's name the elephant in the room. There's a few things on our minds right now. So in the world, especially in the worlds that you're in the nonprofit space, and I am been a long time volunteer and board member and serve in leadership in nonprofit organizations from a volunteer perspective. The climate matters a lot. A lot has changed. There's a little bit of, global conflict, social unrest, political unrest and instability, economic meltdown. And many of you, if not most of you, had to lead through the height of COVID and the pandemic, which had, incredible, devastating effects in the moment. And there's ongoing capacity constraints in a lot of the industries, right, that most of us rely on, like healthcare, government, education, um, childcare, elder care. All of those industries have been further undermined. So when we kind of talk about the climate, what surfaces for you? Like if you think about what feels like an, a macro level trend that's pressing on your industry space right now, on your nonprofit or on your personal space right now, what does that look like? Feel free to drop it in the chat if you're comfortable coming off of mute. I think that the climate has become kind of a euphemism for a whole bunch of things that are going on. But understanding how much is going on, I think, is part of unlocking that energy and that resourcefulness and even the strategies that we need to continue to learn despite that.
Hi,
Leslie, could
Myra's
you?
asking if you can repeat the question.
Absolutely. What in the macro climate right now feels most pressing, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life? Like, what is the weight that feels like it's kind of constraining either your resources or your time or your energy?
So Tamara is saying, we're getting a lot of in the chat. Everything is at a turning point. Kathy's saying problems in the country and in our government. Daria is saying AI and the ethical and professional implications. Christine, scarcity creating a lack of compassion and empathy.
Mm,
And Myra says, I agree with everything listed.
Oh, those are also good. Oh, and the compassion fatigue piece as well. That I think is kind of like this overarching emotional feeling for many of us as we look at the retraction, right, that's happening. And I know many of you are also in sectors and parts of the nonprofit sector where funding has been at risk, and AI is another excellent one. I moderated a panel. I'm sorry, I introduced a panel for the nonprofit where I volunteer just about a week and a half ago. It was around health equity and restoring trust in communities of color in the era of AI. And we had clinicians talking about just how fast AI is coming into medical spaces and health spaces. And that as a result, the oversight, governance, regulation, checks and balances, even when it's well intentioned, the regulatory or governance frameworks almost just can't keep up with the speed of it.
There's
Did
quite a
anything?
few more comments. Donna
Please.
mentioned personal life, caring for family members. Um, Myra asked, how do we then, in our capacity, create the turning point for ourselves and for our staff? Roy mentioned punitive top-down authoritarian systems and ways of thinking and leading. Carolyn mentioned underlying feeling of dread and fear.
Mm, yes. Oh, okay. All of that, I think, is echoed, I think echoed by me and by many of us, and it's huge. Um, fear, fear for livelihoods, fear for physical safety, fear for psychological safety. Many people are facing increased risk, increased hate, ethnicity, racial identity, LGBTQ status, people who are religious status, all of those things make it feel incredibly personal. In addition to, I think, the very powerful work that you are all doing in your professional lives, right, to support different constituents who are also, in many cases, deeply affected. One of the early research studies that I ran was on the mental load or cognitive load, and it kind of started me on this other kind of pseudo obsession about understanding what are those like psychological stressors, what are those like brain stressors that we hold. And I won't go into too much detail. I like have a whole section on my book about this, but basically there's cognitive load in that your brain is like a bookshelf that fits 7 books at any given time when we're talking about our short-term memory. So many of us are trying to shove 17 books, 70 books, but it actually fits 7. So there's a certain discomfort about the amount of information that we're navigating, the number of details that we're trying to accommodate at any given moment, and just feeling those things kind of slip off the bookshelf because there isn't space. There's also increased decision fatigue, change fatigue, and other like very real biological responses that we have to just dealing with too many things to think about, too many things to plan for. And fear undermines clarity. So that as well is something I think that many of us are needing to contend with. And we can definitely talk more about that as we get into strategies. But even coming here and coming together and having this community support, having a place to voice fears, having a psychologically safe space to share concerns, having other people see you and honor that, that is part of the antidote, right, to what's happening right now. But what's happening has a profound impact, right, on how we are kind of showing up in our professional lives and our personal lives in this whole climate. One of the things in my big study that I ask about, and this particular study, it's parents, and I'll disclose it is overwhelmingly mothers. It's like 97% women. So it is a very mom-centric lens in this particular study, but also I have quite a few other studies that are more employer related studies that are much more gender balanced. And the results are actually quite similar between the two. But, you know, there's so many things that people have said they want to be able to learn. Like when I ask in the study, what do they need for their well-being or for their productivity or for their happiness? And how do they want to spend their time? Like learning and growth float to the top, right? They're behind things like sleep and slightly behind things like sleep and exercise. But sometimes you need to learn things, right, to be able to get the sleep or the exercise that you might want, right, depending on your circumstances. But saying, I want to enjoy things more. I want to take courses, professional development courses, personal courses, right? People during the height of the lockdown and the study has been running since March 30th of 2020, but there was a window where I could just kind of have a lens into people's lives. Like during lockdown, people were rediscovering everything from, sourdough bread baking to just playing board games with their families to being able to sit outside to taking more walks. And we've had this really sharp shift back to in person, back to intensity, and the macro climate that we were talking about and how that has added pressure. But whether there are things you want to learn in your personal life right now or things that you want to learn in your professional life right now to upskill or add stability or to increase income or to increase joy, right? You might want to learn how to knit or how to sew or how to do something stress relieving. Um, Whatever your goals are right now or whatever feels like an unmet need, learning and growth is part of that, right? That's part of the unlock to get there. So I wanted to again share and have everyone kind of share whatever you feel comfortable with. Do you have goals right now that feel elusive? And to the extent you're comfortable sharing in the chat or coming off of mute, like what feels like there's friction between you and that goal, or that you haven't quite been able to unlock it. And if you have a sense of why that is, why that is.
If you're comfortable doing so, encourage you to turn on your camera and ask your question. I think that's the best way to
Absolutely. We
connect
decided
and
this would
get
be
there.
interactive. We
Uh,
decided in
I was
advance.
looking for the raised hand and I'm still looking, but I could speak.
Great.
The ability to finally learn how to separate work from home and the
Mm,
ability to, and this has been I've been in my position now for almost 10 years. We are a nonprofit. To be able to not worry about any emergency messages after hours,
mm,
letting the system work where it may not work sometimes, and then feeling sort of ownership of what if something goes wrong.
mm.
And the ability to, when you go on vacation, to really lock your desk, turn down your computer, and say, okay, I'm going on vacation. I think that's my biggest challenge.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us because that's a huge challenge, right? And I'll often refer to it as like real PTO versus PTO on paper, where you're actually away. You're not looking at messages, you're not scanning for emergencies, but you can truly pause
And,
and
uh, and then,
restore.
and then following up with when you do return, as I heard you mention earlier in the talk, when you do return, how everything just gets built up.
Mhm.
And that's where I feel.
Um, that's a great one. That's a great one. We will talk about that and tackle it because that one is a I think a huge challenge that many of us face. And then if you are in the nonprofit space where you in many cases are serving communities where you are interacting with real emergencies, you are interacting with time-sensitive requests that really matter. So it adds a lot of extra weight. I see a raised hand.
I was just going to build off of that and what Myra put in chat. I think that just the idea of capacity building, checking out is one thing too, but also like I feel like, you just get through a big report or you just get through something. You're like, okay, now we'll have time to focus on, you know, a longer term strategic plan or like a more of a team retreat or really thinking about how can we offer professional development for staff. And then you're catching up on everything that, had to get postponed while you were focused on a big funder report or something like that. And so it just kind of feels like everything's always within reach, but it's not fully reached. And then, um, if when you do try to have a day or some like a more staff-centered time, it does push you behind on other things. And so just figuring out and then sometimes even what you do for your staff, like if you try to do a training, you pay for the training and then you or a conference or something, and it's really wasn't worth that money. And the work that we do helping families feels like, well, that was those funds. If I had known this is how that training would be, or that we wouldn't walk away with as many tools, we wouldn't have invested in that. And so just
Mm.
knowing how to invest in professional development for staff and capacity building, balancing it with the need to do's and also the unknowns.
Oh, these are great. And that's huge as well. And I think you stated it really beautifully in terms of all the little nuance that comes underneath it. But at the umbrella level, it is capacity, right? It's capacity building so that you as leaders have coverage, so that your teams are able to grow and upskill and provide coverage, but also there's just the nature of working in nonprofit where there's there's always like a really big remit in front of you, and it feels like probably never quite enough resources to tackle it, and a lot of interdependencies as you try to tackle it. Did that capture?
I think just also kind of the anticipation that comes with, okay, I'm doing a full day training with my staff, and I know then like the walls are going to crumble around me when I come back and try to catch up on everything.
Mm, yes, that's right. Oh, and you mentioned as well, which I really liked, that there's the time and the financial investment in training, and not always having that training meet expectations and then feeling like it was a missed opportunity or a
Yep.
lost opportunity. Okay, that's great. Wonderful. These are fantastic ones. And I'd love to tackle it as we go through. Was there anything else in the chat or someone, because I don't see any other raised
Hi,
hands?
Myra.
Hi.
My thing is, so I'm taking this time to do this for professional development to help others. I'm sure there are moments of reflection, like personally, but I'm kind of like shelving that because my major pain point, as I hear colleagues in this space, is who I'm trying to support have these same possible um, uh, elusive, thoughts, and where yes to us offering, financial incentives to do professional development. Like we offer X amount of dollars, even though it's less than last year because of what we mentioned here, the financial constraints, pulling back on that, but it's still more than what I found others. And it goes untouched, right? It
Mm,
literally goes untouched and it's being paid for. And um, monthly, with all the different networks that we're a part of, I've worked to tailor professional development for our staff and offer free opportunities and put that out there. One of the tactics that I've used is actually putting it on our public calendar and inviting the people that I believe, like, especially if it's a managerial thing, putting that inside there. I'm like, oh, wait, did I register? I'm like, no, but this is me, like, basically pinging you. This is you said that you wanted to grow and upskill in your managerial. This is something that would fit that. And it also fits your calendar. And that's why I invited you from the public calendar. It's up to them. I stopped short of registering for people, because then that gets a little bit weird, for lack of a better word. But
Proactive,
yeah,
assertive.
but that's, I really feel, and there's a need, right? There's a need for upskilling, right?
Yeah.
There's an actual named need, organizationally as a goal, as work planning, and personally in individuals that have asked, and named this at the beginning, and where we've put a lot of time into our 360s. So here we are in Q2, because that's how my brain works, and where, okay, what have you done in Q1? Here's what's been offered. How are you staying in tuned with you, right? How are you staying in tuned with you so that 3 quarters down the road, you're not unsatisfied with a position that you did nothing about when these opportunities were afforded to you? So there seems to be a misalignment, or there's a misalignment of sorts, but then there's a real weight, right, to everything that's being bubbled up here. And I echo those things when we're talking about self. If I have to look at the mirror mirror to me on what professional development and why I'm even taking this.
That is fantastic, and I really appreciate that additional dimension as well, right? It's right, it's personal, but it's also reflected and echoed with staff, and there's varying levels, it sounds like, of engagement. Even though people have stated goals to grow professionally, not everyone avails themselves of trainings and resources, or even professional development budgets, which are like, rare and a rare precious gift. Not everyone's taking advantage of it. So I would love to tackle all of these things, because I think that there are barriers that stand in the way, and the focus that I have for this session is really about how do you make the time? Because the challenge, especially in my world, right, with parents and caregivers, the challenge is rarely willpower, right? Like almost the mom's hierarchy of needs framework that I showed you at the beginning, and learning and growth and fun were way, way, way up at the tippy top. But you still have to climb over childcare responsibilities, possibly even elder care responsibilities, your household needs, all the things that are blowing up there, professional, right? All of those things like sit very firmly in our calendars and on our minds and our hearts as well. And then stretching into anything extra can feel just like a lot of extra when you're exhausted. So sometimes I think there's a lot of different pieces that you can tackle to chip away at that personally, and also to help your staff think about different ways to chip away at it. I start with the fact that you can always grow. This is not an issue, it sounds like, for this crowd, because of course you're already like, twisting, bending, and doing all types of incredible things, especially in these past 5 years. But I let people know that, our brains are always adapting and growing, and that if you want to grow, you can. But I think that people do learn in different ways, and depending on your schedule and your availability and your constraints, there's lots of things that can stand in the way of it. One of the things, so I'm just going to pull some threads from what you've shared so far. It feels like there's a few things, right, that are potentially learning opportunities, right? As leaders and as leaders in a really, I think, challenging time, in a space that has been under a lot of pressure and financial pressure and social pressure, right? So many different points of pressure. How can you capacity build, right, in a resource constrained space, for example, and capacity build in the broadest sense of the word, right? That's like helping upskill your current people, adding space for yourselves and for others to learn new things, like all of those dimensions of capacity. Another possible learning objective could be, establishing coverage, a coverage plan, right? Thinking about yourselves, whether it is that you're on a fabulous vacation somewhere, or whether you just want to go home, or 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 shut the computer off at a certain point of the day. You are also dealing with very real time-sensitive emergencies, right? In some cases. So, what might be a coverage plan for off hours coverage? Almost like one of my clients that I love very much is a local hospital, right? So I have a range of people that I tend to work with there, and you have people who are, clinicians, you have people who are post-ops, you have people who are working in essential services, but you have a lot of 24/7 jobs, right? So is there a coverage plan or a backup plan or an off hours plan, right, that could address some of those constraints that you're feeling and experiencing? So that's kind of another possible learning goal. Can anyone think of a third that might kind of help untangle some of the threads that have been shared so far? Staff engagement is one that's coming to mind for me. Like there's also an element of unlocking the will and the passion and the engagement within your teams so that they can keep growing professionally, achieve the next level of responsibility, which of course helps them, helps you, helps the organization. So maybe even a staff engagement piece is in the mix as a possible learning goal. I'm just making some of these up. Before I move on to the next slide, any others that come to mind? I think perhaps also there's a self-care component, which is the world that I spend a lot of time in. Work-life integration, work-life separation, and coming up with, I hate to use the word boundaries because I think boundaries fail us a lot of the time. But for lack of a better distinction, like what are the like rules and rituals that you can honor in your daily life as a practice that actually work for the career that you're in, right? That still allow you space for family, space to rest and recover, space to kind of recharge and reset and refuel within the context of right the career that you are in and with the resources that you have. So those are 4 I have. If I've missed anything, let me know. And we can always, there's going to be time, so we can always chime in with more. A couple of things that I share with people as well is that, learning can look like a lot of things. It can be formal training and attending an on-site or an off-site or for half a day or going to a conference or taking a class. But it also can be listening to podcasts to learn about AI and how LMN systems work, or learning about how other nonprofits are using AI tools effectively, or learning about partnerships or collaborations in the nonprofit sector and how people might be creatively building capacity or doing new things. I just the session that I was referencing, the health equity and trust session, we are our small nonprofit where I'm a volunteer, NAHSC, National Association of Health Services Executives. We partnered with the Massachusetts Hospital Association because I knew that we wanted to put on more health equity programming. My committee is very small, and we're all volunteers and they're all staff. And it's, so they were a perfect partner. It meant working a different way, but we put on a really great program and they did a lot of lifting that's harder for us as a small volunteer run organization to do, for example. So thinking about other ways to bring some of that learning in, not just live and structured programs, but self-paced programs, self-paced information that's broad, and also self-paced information that's deep. I'm typically listening to audiobooks or podcasts when I am cooking dinner every night. That is kind of part. And sometimes I'm listening to a book really slowly. Sometimes I'm reading a physical book very slowly. But there's lots of ways to fit little bursts of information in, depending on what your goals are. Um, as we're kind of talking through some different modalities of learning and thinking about whether it's for yourself or for your staff, are there approaches that feel like they could fit in and give you some more wiggle room to fit in the upskilling and the development, personal development for yourself and staff development in ways that maybe aren't as traditional?
I just want to mention that Roy had texted in the chat. Restorative practices such as community building circles are a great way to meaningfully engage staff, deepen relationships, and promote shared learning.
Ooh, I love that. Thank you for that, Rory. Maybe we can talk about that as well. I think that's amazing. And restorative and even, and I'm assuming this is maybe even connected to some of like restorative justice practices, but there's learning and bonding and engagement that could happen potentially with the constituents you serve, right? In addition to staff. So I could envision that there might be ways to bring some of that knowledge sharing and bonding and bringing growth opportunities together, right? For your community partners, for your members, in addition to the staff. Other thoughts on modalities of learning now that I've kind of shared just, a few, like if it's not always just the conference or the training session, or could it be thinking about the great comment earlier that staff might go through a training and it may not be sufficient, or it may not have hit the notes that were really important for your team? Like, how are there less one and done opportunities for people to keep growing? Like, could the group all agree to a book club? Maybe it takes a really long time, depending on people's lives outside or lives at work, but like it could be a book club discussion and you read a book over the course of 2 or 3 months and all get together and talk about it, or have a speaker in, or, are there things that kind of feel realistic based on your role and the constraints and knowing your teams too? So one thing that I'll share, and we'll keep moving through this because I also want to make sure that we have additional time for questions, even though questions have come up throughout, that if you have the opportunity to have one-on-ones with your staff, in addition to some reflection time for yourself, really think about like, what are 1 or 2 learning objectives I have this year, right? Make the time frame broad. Because that gives you a lot more room to come up with your own, if you've heard the term, your own personal curriculum. I used to use the term learning plan for a long time, but I've recently seen personal curriculum. But it could be that if you really want to learn about how to build capacity within your team, for example, you could figure out, okay, this is my goal in the next 6 months. I really have to add capacity, or I really have to add coverage. We're all burnt out and we're all tired, and no one can stop looking at their emails or their phones because we don't have backup coverage off hours. How, as a small nonprofit, can I create that? How can we create that? Could we partner with another nonprofit that has that? Could we share costs for that? My favorite technique, which I'll talk briefly about, and I'll also follow up after this with a handout on, is a listening tour. I think one of the things that I've discovered about myself, maybe it was because I'm a researcher and I was drawn to research, but almost anything, almost, not everything, but a lot of topics that I've had to tackle in my professional life, industry spaces, roles, new responsibilities. I've launched products in China. I did not know how to speak Chinese. I did not know anything about Chinese culture at the time, but I can become an expert on a lot in about 6 months. And one of the tools that has been very helpful for me is a listening tour. So even if it's something you haven't done, let's kind of stick with capacity building or backup coverage in a small nonprofit for emergency and off hours coverage. Like there's people in the community, perhaps even within nonprofit net, but other communities who have figured it out. So it's like, who could you talk to who's done it? Or knows people who have done it. And then you reach out within your network. I've often started with LinkedIn. I've started with childhood friends, and I will just kind of generate a list of 5 or 6 people who know about the thing that I need to know about. And you ask them if they can spend 20 minutes to 30 minutes with you just for you to kind of go deep, and better understand the topic. And you might choose based on the people on your list, what range of the topic. Like if there's someone who I'm making this up because I don't know what your nonprofits do, but if you are in like human services and maybe you're serving a vulnerable population, like an elderly population or children, and you have facilities perhaps that are housing people, you might talk to somebody who is in public housing, or you might talk to somebody who has experience in elder care or hospital systems or a space that's adjacent with similar challenges that or organizations of similar size, for example. And you can start to begin with some outreach and set very, very lightweight goals for yourself about what you can accomplish realistically within that time frame. And I want to make sure we have time for additional questions and thoughts on this because I know that by asking questions throughout, I've kind of compressed some of our time at the end.
Yeah, just to do a time check, we're at 1:52 right now.
Yeah, let's flip over to pausing the presentation. Okay. Are you still there? Did I stop sharing?
Yep, I
Oh,
think we're yep.
okay. I'm just gonna end. There we go. Yay. Okay, you're all back. I can see you now. I can see your lovely faces or your Zoom squares. Questions, thoughts, things you're fired up to try. Oh, don't get shy now.
Hi, Leslie. I'm Jessica. How are you?
Hi, Jessica.
Thanks for the presentation. I have some thoughts that just bubbled up that I wanted to share. Because when I was listening to Myra, speaking and Katie about like engaging staff, I used to work with a staff that did very diverse programming, and one team was always in the public schools. And everybody had, similar to Myra's staff, like a development budget, but only the education team ever used it. And what I found through investigating is I think part of it was just the environment they were in every day. In schools, professional development is a big part of the culture. And
Yes.
there's a day a month that's dedicated to it. All of your friends are going, transportation is provided, or the person that's giving it comes to you. Um, and it's connected very closely to like advancement. And so what I found over time was I was in a position where I could tilt the culture of my own organization, and starting to add those pieces actually got other people interested in using their professional development budget and time as well. And one of the things we did, one that you mentioned, was we did a staff book club because we were really dedicated to talking about more equity in our programs. So we bought everybody the same book. We took a half a day where we were going to do discussion groups. We had a couple of staff who were leading the groups and they got incentives to do so. So we knew that they did the reading and they created the questions and they were getting paid extra for it.
Great.
And everybody participated, and it actually did lead to people thinking about different goals for their program and how they could really do more equity work within the work they were already doing. So that was just one really success. Not everything has been successful, but that was one example that I thought might be useful for others.
That's a beautiful example. And I love that. And I would even add that because there was a comment earlier where someone mentioned that like training, sometimes it sounded like the trainings themselves missed the mark or staff didn't engage, but you can even have a follow-up. You can say, hey, we learned about this. We went to this session or we read this book together. We're going to have a 6-month check-in to see how we're applying it in our programs. Like, how is equity showing up in your programs now as a result of what we've learned? What's working? Where are you getting stuck? How can we support you? Like, just to almost keep the fire alive a little bit through some ongoing dedicated space on a topic so that people deepen their practice with it. But I love that one. Other questions or comments or ideas? Has anyone here had experience with backup coverage and kind of managing the late night emails or the late night texts, or what I kind of interpreted or assumed from the question earlier are probably related to emergency services or the communities you serve. Has anyone had success with a model to add capacity there so that whoever's in charge, or whether it's in the leadership team or beyond, has more of an opportunity for breaks, for example? Is that a thing?
I'm not saying anything. We have a few more minutes. If here's your chance to get your questions or comments in. Roy, you've been chatting quite a bit. Do you want to unmute yourself and make some comments?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a policy issue here too, right? I mean, we could use better public policy and funding, right, for parent medical leave. Yeah, no, this I really
Huge.
appreciate the talk, Leslie. I'll say all these are amplified too when you have a child with medical complexity or disabilities. So and I fall into that category. So I fully left the workforce after my daughter was born prematurely. So I was a full-time caregiver because we needed a full-time caregiver between my wife and myself. So the idea of the need for self-care and supports for families is real. It's real, especially if you, like I said, if you have a complex or disabled child. So, but yeah, thank you. This has been very helpful.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. It's huge. I mean, we have of the developed world, right? Like we have or of the resourced world, we have like the worst public policy for parents, like the worst. And when I was doing my research for the maternal health panel recently, it's America and Sri Lanka and the Ukraine as it relates to maternal morbidity. But I will say that I did do a leadership session for a group at the Department of Public Health that serve complex medical needs families, and they have like a really great program that's around respite and allowing families to get respite by swapping time with other families who understand, like, oh, they know how to use a feeding tube or they know how to provide complex care. So I thought I would share that because I think what they do is beautiful.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Leslie, and everyone who's attended. We hope that it's helpful. I do want to say this is the final webinar of our 2025-2026 Stronger Roots, Greater Impact series. Just thrilled with everyone who's attended. So happy that Leslie was able to join us and really bring our program to a climatic close. So important and impactful, especially as we're going over. We're looking forward to summer, and it is traditionally a time here that we use to slow down, catch our breath, spend time, regroup, and that's so important for all of us. I wish you all a very, very happy and healthy summer. Please stay tuned. If you are not a subscriber, please sign up for our newsletter and emails to learn more about what we're planning for the next program year starting in September. This program is being recorded and it'll be available certainly by this weekend, so you can review it. And also there will be a follow-up email going on, and I'll get that worksheet from Leslie, and it'll be sent out to everyone who attended. Again, thank you for attending and take care.
Thank you so much, everyone.